Hello, lovely one. Welcome to Module 5. In Module 5, we're going to be talking about protection patterns and processes that we develop when we are younger to keep ourselves safe. And we may find as we become adults, they may moderate how we make contact with the world around us. And before we jump in to the theory around that, I wanted, like we have in previous sessions, gone through a little bit of a summary, and I know we didn't get to record that part when we did our last session, so I wanted to do it here and then add it on so that you have those, because as you say, they're quite useful to go back to and really just get a quick synopsis of everything that we cover in these times together. So we talked about core beliefs. One of the things we talked about in Module 4 was core beliefs, and these are core themes or beliefs that we carry in the world, that we believe the world is as we say it is, that it is, there's no variation, it always works out this way. No matter what we do, it's always going to come out the same way. Now, these can be from our own experience, and it can be from the experiences of, somebody in our lineage, grandparents, great-grandparents, or even before that, or that we've picked up from society. So in the coaching world, there's a lot talked about in terms of beliefs, changing them, letting them go, or even like trying to find the root cause or where they originally came from and then letting that go. The thing is, when we've had an experience, either us or somebody in our lineage, it's not a letting go process. It's actually being able to feel what was felt originally when that core theme or belief first came about. Now, these can be around money. It can be a scarcity around money. So somebody who has actually a significant amount of money or more than enough money in this lifetime can feel a constant sense of scarcity, that it's going to disappear, that there won't be enough, that it's going to run out. And when we look back, say, in their experience, there is nothing that we can find there that would indicate such a belief. But when we look back, say, into somebody's lineage, we may find that a grandparent was on food stamps during the war, or somebody nearly starved to death in their family as a result of something happening and there being a loss of money. And so when we can allow the experience of our lineage to come through us, we can actually allow those feelings to finally be felt. And it's when those feelings are felt that that core belief begins to soften and to change. So it's not a doing process. It's a being with. So whatever these are, as I say, they can be around money. They can be, life's always hard. You have to work really hard, and that's the only way you'll make your way in the world. It can be that people will only love me if I do something for them. It can be around I'm not enough. And one of the things we touched on in Module 5 is that introjects. So introjects are closely related to core beliefs as well, because they can also come in when we're young. So we take something in from an adult and we take it in. An introject is something we take in without chewing. And that's one of those contact styles we talked about. And so if a parent is always saying, oh, you're too much, you're too loud, then we come out with a core belief that we're too loud because we take something in from a parent because we are not challenging them when we're younger. In order to stay connected and safe with them, we hold them as all-knowing, and we take in what they say about the world and trust that it's only when, more of our brain develops, we separate more from our parents, that we start to actually go, well, is that true? Does it really work that way? But those younger ones, when we responded to, we take in, as the parent actually says them as though they were true. So the other part that we talked about was resonancing. This is, when we're in resonance, we're in flow. We're in contact with ourselves and the world around us. And what we're doing when we're listening to our clients is helping them come into resonance with themselves, helping them come into flow so they can do the things that they want to do in the world. They can transition in the ways that they want to transition. They can experience the change that they deeply desire. And some of that process is by actually being with them in a way that allows them to process something they couldn't otherwise. So by the way we make contact with them, when we see them, not just with our eyes, but with our whole body, and then we notice what's happening for them so that they can come into contact with their whole body. So we talk about that tracking process, and we're not just tracking, a client's words, we're tracking their process, what they do in moments like, when they turn away, when we've said something. And what we are tracking in order to integrate the parts of a client is we are tracking their internal experience, their kind of middle experience, so to speak, and their outer experience. So their middle experience is their physical experience of like what it feels like to be touched by the world, our emotions, our tightening of our body. And then our middle zone is how we make sense of the world, how we make sense of memories, experiences. And then the outer experience is, how we make contact with the world, how we see it, how we touch it, how we taste it. It's like our relational contact, how we move into staying with someone or move away from somebody. And as well as part of that, we are connecting the cognitive, emotional, and physical. So they're kind of different ways of speaking about it, and whichever way sits more easily with you, do that. It's just bringing that person into wholeness so they can be more of themselves in every moment. And the last part we talked about was that cycle of contact. So there's a movement that we make, a cycle, when we do anything in the world. Some of these can be short, some of these can be long. We talked about brushing your teeth. You have a sensation, you take action, you brush your teeth. You then go, are my teeth clean, or is there still a taste? Then you go back and brush if they aren't. If your mouth now feels clean and fresh, then you go into the fertile void, which is in the rest, and then you wait for another sensation to come up. Now, people will have interruptions all the way along that cycle of contact, and that cycle of contact will impact whether they're satisfied by the action they take, whether they just perpetually take action without actually having any sensation. So there's a lot of list writing in the world around us because we go, these are all the things we have to do, and nothing comes through our body as to actually, this is the next thing we need to do. That is like the next part in our journey, the next part of a process, because we bring in a body wisdom and knowing of which piece is next. But if we're just functioning off a list, we just do. And often there's not even any assimilation or rest after a list. It's just getting it all done. And mostly there's no satisfaction that comes from that. So there's a tired void that's not fertile that we arrive in afterwards. At the end of the day, people come back exhausted and tired because there hasn't been a lot of integration. We live in a society with so much trauma, and that is one of the things that we see as part of the structures, the collective trauma structures, is a world and a workforce that doesn't actually look at how we function as a human being in a healthy way that sustains us, that looks like rest, that looks like listening to parts. Even Google, I don't know whether they still do it, but at one point in time they said, I think it was 15% of somebody's day, they could do whatever they wanted. It had to contribute to the business in some kind of way. And it was in those 15 minutes, the most genius things were thought of, when people could actually follow a natural urge from beginning to end, that actually the most brilliant parts of the business were developed. So that's a little summary of that piece, which I am going to add. So this will hopefully be a flow from the whole parts of the video for you. Projection patterns are mostly developed when we are young. So they're not particularly sophisticated a lot of the time, but they are incredibly wise, because we wouldn't have got to where we are in the world if we hadn't developed them. We would, often have severe mental disorders, a whole lot of different things. And that's not to say some people don't. It can, despite a whole lot of protection processes, their experience of being in the world can be too much for them for some reason. And then they still struggle enormously being in the world. But we all have them to some degree, because most of us have been parented by parents who have a fair level of trauma. And if our parents don't have a fair level of trauma, we then go into a schooling system that does, because other children do, the teachers do, and we carry that there. So we are constantly finding ways of being in the world that keep us safe. What happens, however, is those ways, as I say, are developed when we are young, and they might then moderate how we make contact in the world as adults, because they actually prevent us often from getting what we desire in the world. So what a lot of coaches will say, well, I can see what that person needs, because it's actually so much easier to see what's happening for somebody else than it is for us. I can see what's happening for my client. I've told them what to do, and then they don't go and do it. And what we know is there's a protection pattern or process in place there when they don't go and do it. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they can't be bothered. It's not because they're not in the right energy. There's something that is keeping them, that they've learned a way of being to not do that thing. And it's often the thing they most want in life, because it's the thing they got the least of when they were growing up. So it's like when they've had a parent who hasn't been a particularly connected parent, they will seek a relationship that gives them what they didn't get. And so we want the things, we ache for the things that we come, and clients will go, I want to do this, I want to grow my business, I want to speak to more people. And then somebody goes, well, then just do a live every day. And they'd go, I can't, I don't know why, I just can't. And then the coach gets irritated with them and makes them wrong. And then something gets stuck and the whole thing falls apart. And the client mostly feels a huge degree of shame as a result of that, because they want it, they know, and mostly we even know what we need to do to get the results we want, whatever, whether it's a good partnership, whether it's better parenting, or, we know what we need to do, but it's the doing it that becomes so impossible. So when we can actually be with a client and actually stay with them and understand what they're doing, then it helps. So, if somebody has been constantly made wrong, they are likely to become a perfectionist as a result. And that's their protection. It's like, if I make a mistake, I'm going to get into trouble, so I become a perfectionist. Now, if you say to somebody, just get it done, don't worry about making mistakes, just make a quick decision, write this report quickly. Yes, there'll be some typos, don't worry about it. It triggers such a level of anxiety in them, because they fear being made wrong, like they were when they were younger. So they simply won't do it. They will spend hours and hours and hours going over it to make sure there are no mistakes in there. And if you shame the person for being a perfectionist, this is their pattern, that they keep themselves safe. So they feel profoundly unsafe in the world once you start to shame them around that, and will mostly start to collapse, go quiet, move away, and a whole lot of other things. And it's the same thing with, like, people say, well, you're over giving. That is another pattern where people have learned that they were only loved by a parent if they did something for the parent. They weren't loved for who they were loved for what they did. And so they learn that that's the only way they're going to be accepted in the world. And yes, it exhausts them, and they know it exhausts them. They might even have a high level of awareness about it and be frustrated, but they can't stop doing it because they fear they will lose love. And love's the thing we most want in the world. So of course somebody is going to do it. But then when we can go, work in a little bit of a polarity, like, what would it be like if you didn't do it? What would happen if you didn't do it? And then the person gets to go, I won't be loved. And it's like, yeah, I wonder what that's like, not to be loved. And I wonder whether, not being loved is something you've experienced a lot of. And, then they get to talk about it. Then suddenly movement comes. Then they suddenly go, well, actually, over time, I don't want to do this for this person any longer. It annoys me doing it. But they can change that pattern. So it's always having some curiosity when, because you are going to be offering suggestions to your clients of how to do something. When they get stuck, then it's like, okay, something's happening here. Then it's like being curious, understanding what's going on. There's some pattern here that's keeping them safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another pattern is, that can often be is like clients are in their head. So when you were working with Christine, her pattern of protection is to go into her head, make sense of it, then she feels safe, then she moves on. But nothing's actually changing. She's just learned to do that to alleviate that feeling. So she feels uncomfortable in the moment. You asked a question, dropped her into body, feel uncomfortable, go back to safety in her head. And then she's stuck, basically. So because the being in her head is never going to kind of bring in that integration, bring in those parts that are actually really hurting. And you will see lots of those. So also these themes that are talked about in the coaching world, just hold some curiosity when you see them and go, I wonder what the pattern is that is keeping that in place. I wonder what the pattern is that developed that in the first place. And with your clients. And, it's just a nice way. Sometimes in the coaching world, I stay in contact with a lot of people who I have profoundly different perspectives from, because they're like, oh, that's this, that you get to kind of almost understand when they're talking about something differently. You go, actually, it's not that, it's this, and this. Because those are the things your clients will be hearing a lot of the time, because a lot of these things have like made it into like,
Mainstream.
mainstream kind of common, used language these days. It's been, with us all connected to social media like we are. So sorry, yeah.
Gonna say, I was just thought of someone like Mel Robbins. It's like so annoying when someone like that gets such popularity. And then because a lot of what she says is quite shaming.
Mm.
I feel, yeah, I totally bought into it in the early days. It's like, oh God. And there's so many of them out there.
And they are, and I think we have such a high tolerance to shame, because somebody even said to me when I wrote a post, well, I got a lot out when someone shamed me. And I went, we've been shamed so often that we have quite a high tolerance to it. We actually accept it. It doesn't do something in our system. And from that person, I can feel she's quite guarded. So although she said it helped, she's kind of forced her into something. There's something quite stiff about her. Um, and she doesn't realize that's the shame kind of lurking at a deeper level. Which is, it's quite, seeing somebody go, well, I enjoy being shamed was, yeah,
Yeah.
just shows how, we're shamed at school, we're shamed by school kids, by teachers, by society. So now by the coaching, parts of the coaching industry is quite brutal to watch. In a way. And, Cynthia says in the call with me, oh, it's the container. That's why I feel safe. But she doesn't realize all the things I do that make people feel safe, because they know I won't shame them. They know I won't do all of these things, kind of thing. It's actually something I hold very consciously, that people don't know all the parts. And then they go, oh, it's just like you, or it's just the container, but it's more than that. That, anyone can, if you apply a lot of these things, anyone will feel safe doing it. So the other part of kind of patterns of protection that we learn is like emotional. So as you find with, your beautiful family system, is most of them couldn't feel what was coming up for them, and they did a whole lot of different things. So these emotional things we learn as well when we're younger. So they're either something that is done to us by a parent, we do to ourselves, or we watch a parent do to themselves. So something that will be done to us, a lot of parents, so when a baby cries, babies are no different from adults. They need to cry. They have emotional feelings just the same as adults do. And what happens when a baby cries, most parents will do anything to make it stop. So there are two different cries. There's a need cry, like I'm wet, nappy, I need it changed, I'm hungry, I'm uncomfortable, I'm the wrong temperature. But what parents do is they interpret every cry as something to be stopped, as a need, like check all everything. And then when the baby still continues to cry, they do something. So parents will jiggle a baby or bounce a baby to get them to stop crying. They will stick a dummy in its mouth. They will feed it. They will try and believe it's bored and entertain it. So when you feed a child constantly when they need to cry, over time, they start to misinterpret the signal between emotion and food. And you'll see that with a lot of society. We go, I'm upset, I want to eat. And that's because often when we were crying, we were fed. You'll see a lot of adults, then, they sucked a dummy, they sucked something in, and it can be with food as well, will then smoke as adults because they suck their emotions back in when they start to feel them. Children that are kind of moved repetitively, moved around the house, bounced on balls, jiggled, will need to exercise. So it's not a normal amount of exercise, but as soon as the emotions build up, they will start to do excessive exercise. They won't be able to stop. They always want to go to the gym. They always want to run. They really struggle to keep still in any moment. And children who've constantly been like shown something like, let's look at a book when you cry, distracted in some kind of way, when they become adults, will often like scroll through social media, watch Netflix. Now we can do all of these things. A lot of parents will jiggle and shush and entertain and feed and do a variety, or they may just do one, and they will do whatever was done to them when they had emotions. Now, children who are just left alone will start to do something to themselves because babies can't process emotions alone. They need somebody there. So they will do something to themselves. So they will then suck a thumb, suck on a blanket, need a teddy, whatever, to then keep themselves, to hold their emotions in. And children can then watch adults do something. So they can see as they grow up, an adult who gets upset will drink alcohol, will smoke a cigarette, will eat. So that then, if it wasn't done to them, they start to witness their parents doing it. And that's like a way of being in the world. Because when we're younger, we see our parents as all-knowing and doing the best thing possible. So children who witness a parent drink a huge amount of alcohol when they get upset or something like that are likely to do the same thing as well. So we learn these patterns as we go through life. And you will find that your clients will show certain patterns. And the thing is, when that pattern comes, like when we reach for the food, when we reach for the cigarette, that is the moment those emotions are coming to the surface. And that is when we can actually be with somebody. So if a client is going, I don't know how to stop doing this or whatever, that as they are reaching, if they can find some level of connection in that moment, something can be processed and released. Because it's right at the surface. So the other patterns and protections, these are kind of styles of contact. These move along a continuum. So we respond in a certain way, but it's not that when you're working with a client, it's not that one end of the continuum is right and the other is wrong. But what we're trying to do is like when we are able to be and move in the world, we are flexible. So we will move backwards and forwards along the continuum. When we learn a way of being, a protection process or pattern, what it is we become fixed and we respond to the world in the same way all the time. And that's when, when we respond to somebody who's yelling at us or somebody who's trying to love us in the same way, it might be useful when someone's yelling at us, but when we're actually trying to let love in, it's not useful if we respond in the same way. So it's like, you'll notice that, and I think it was, I can't remember, one of your clients that came from the corporate world that the company sent her to you. And she sounded like she had quite a lot of fixed ways of being in the world, that with a little bit of work and awareness, she would have learned to be more flexible and move. And I think that's what was really grating on the company, is that she was just responding no matter what the situation, as though she was being attacked, and she wasn't actually always being attacked.
Yeah.
But because she was probably attacked when she was younger, that was the protection process and the style of contact that she actually developed. So what you are wanting when you work along these continuums is to help the client develop some awareness about where they are and how they're responding in the world and what happens and what is informing it. Because that can really help them change in how they start to respond as a employer or employee or coach in the world. So the one is deflection and reception. So deflection is, and you could see it a little bit happening with Christine, as when in the beginning, when you wanted her to go into her body, she was kind of deflecting. So she's trying to push you away. Some clients will use like a wall of words to keep you at base. They'll just talk and talk and talk, and you actually can't get a word in edgeways. They have developed a very good deflection response. And now deflection's good. If someone gets angry at you, you want to deflect that. But if somebody's loving you, your client doesn't actually want to deflect that. You want to let that in. And a client who's highly deflective won't let anything in, good, bad, or anything. So you're trying to help them then move a little bit more to being receptive, to let something in. What is it like when, this person tries to love you? What do you feel? And they're like, probably feel terror because they weren't loved when they were younger. So it's just that curiosity of what keeps them stuck in this place. And then the other one is retroflexion and impulsivity. So retroflexion is, I cannot take action in the world, and I don't do what I say. So I can't do what I want to. So what we're doing is that we are holding everything back. We don't feel anything. We hold our emotions in, we hold our actions in, we hold everything in, because we fear often that if we let them out, something bad's going to happen. As you can often see, somebody who possibly is a perfectionist will often retroflect, and you'll find people who struggle to take action. And those are people that are retroflecting. So it's then on the other end is impulsivity, where I just do without thinking. Now, it's useful to be impulsive when you are, say, thinking about going to the beach or something. Go, yeah, I'd like to go to the beach. It doesn't need a huge amount of thought. You just go. It's not useful to be impulsive when someone says, I met you 2 days ago, let's get married, kind of thing. Because then there's some thought that needs in. So it's like, it's following those clients. The highly impulsive clients are also unlikely to come to coaching or for help or for anything like that. It will be mostly the people who hold everything back. And there'll be people who often depressed, often exhausted, have learned to hold everything in rather than to let it out. And, sometimes you will work with clients who will be who'll be employees and they're like, I hate this company. I hate it. And when you try and work with them to help them leave something that's not good, they won't leave either. And it's often because they're retroflecting and they won't take action. So they're holding something in, and there will be a reason that they're doing that as well. There'll be a reason, like, it's better to stay where I know if I take action, it's wrong. If I take action, bad things happen, whatever it is. And if you can help them kind of, because what they're doing, they're going into their head a lot, trying to make sense of it. They overthink it, and then they don't take action. And you're trying to help them move to being more impulsive, but without making them wrong for not taking action. It's more about having that curiosity about what it is that is keeping them so stuck in that place. And when you have that curiosity, it increases their awareness of all the parts that are impacting them, because there will be a whole lot of different parts, often in conflict with one another, that will be impacting what they're doing or not doing. Now, the other one is projection and ownership. So projection is, I can't hold this myself, so I'm going to put it onto the world to hold for me. And ownership is, I'm going to take responsibility for everything out there. And so, you know, the ownership can be in those moments where we see awful things happen in the world, and we feel like unless we do something about it, nothing's going to change. And that's quite a burden to hold in the world. And it often makes it, and it's something I can relate to a lot. It's like, if I don't do something, terrible things are going to keep happening. And it can be quite exhausting for me at times. And when I can move more to like, actually, I just keep some of the world at bay, then it's easier. So again, it's like in different times, different parts are useful. And it's helping somebody respond uniquely in each situation to the world, rather than constantly projecting and never letting something in. You know, when, again, if something awful is coming in, and you can go, hey, I don't want it, and put it back. When somebody else is giving you something that doesn't belong to you, and you can project it and put it back, that's actually quite a useful thing to do. You know, often we think of projection as a bad thing, but at times it can actually be very beneficial when you go, I'm actually not responsible for something awful happening in the world. I'm not going to take responsibility for it. And then at times we can go, there's something awful happening in the world, and I want to actually contribute to all of those around me saying something, so something gets to change.
Mm-hmm.
So introjection and rejection, you know, some of these sound quite similar to one another, and they all, you know, we separate these things out in order to understand them. But once you've integrated all of them, then you just hold some curiosity about them, and they all kind of fit together. So introjection is when we take something in from the outside world without chewing it. So that's often we take in when we're younger, like, oh, you're too noisy, noisy people are irritating, whatever it is from our parents, and we take it in as though it's truth. And you will see people as adults do the same thing. You know, like, you can watch Trump supporters take in information like it's true, but they don't actually go and research it or digest it. The same thing with I know we were jesting a little bit, being a bit cheeky about the chemtrails, but it's the same thing. There's very little information that doesn't make any difference. It's like, got so used to taking in information without really checking in whether we think it's real, that we just take it in and hold it. And a lot of the themes you will work with people, the core themes are introjects. They're something that's been told to them when they were younger, and they haven't really digested it, which I think is where, I think it's one of the kind of more leaning towards therapeutic people out there. It's not Byron Katie, it's the other woman, who says, is this true? And that's where that's coming from, is because that introject isn't actually true. I don't think that kind of level of inquiry is helpful to anybody, because for them it feels like it is true. So then you start to set up an internal conflict and dialogue. Whereas when you go, yeah, here with your parents, and then you start to explore the places where it might not be true, like, how do your children feel about you? How does your partner feel about you? Do they have the same sense of you? And then someone will go, no, actually, yeah, probably not. Rather than when you say, is it true? Then they kind of, you take someone straight into their head when you have kind of, yeah, you ask questions in that kind of way. It's almost like a wire question. And then they start, it's like almost a legal battle where they have to then kind of meet you and, yeah, make you wrong or right. And then the other side is rejection. So somebody won't let anything land. You'll find people on the more narcissistic character style will have a rejection kind of style, because what they are is they have a false or fragile sense of self. So they won't let anything land in them that threatens it in any way. And when you try, they'll push it away quite harshly and make the other person wrong. And those people are mostly don't come for coaching or any form of support, so you're unlikely to come across them. Okay, so we are, how are you going? How was all of that? Anything you wanted to say?
Good.
Questions?
No, just the overarching theme throughout anything that we've spoken about really is that just holding that curiosity, isn't it? It's like, and I think that's the bit that I'll experiment with Louise this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's been tricky to get to.
Oh, yeah,
Kay was also holding that a bit. She's like, I'm trying not to take responsibility. I offered somebody who I thought was going to be, who, yes, does what they say and all of these things. And she's now, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah.
We get there in the end.
Yeah. So this is a map of change. So change is something, basically when somebody comes to you, they're wanting something to change. They want to have a different experience of being in the world. They want to have they want to change the job they're doing. They want to change how they feel in the job that they're doing. At some point in time, no matter whether someone's coming for a massage, for, whatever experience, we often do something to experience some level of change. So it is something that we all know in ourselves. And most people make change out to be something simple because they know everybody wants it. And if they can make it out to be simple and easy, then everyone will come to them, because most people have wanted something to change and their experience is it hasn't. And the thing that with change, with any change, is it takes time. And most people don't acknowledge that. It is one of the biggest parts of change. It needs time because the way we are in the world is incredibly complex. And when all those parts get to be heard and healed, then change starts to happen. And it doesn't happen in this huge, enormous, like, oh, wow, 1 minute I was here and the next minute I was there. It is a looking back. And I think one of your clients said that to you, if I remember correctly. She was like, oh, it was just, you listened so beautifully or something like that, because the change she experienced is so subtle from moment to moment. Clients often actually don't even pick it up. And we don't pick it up. It's only when we go back and think about what we were like 10 years ago, I think, that we can go, oh my word, something looks profoundly different in my life since then. And I think one of the most helpful things you can do with clients is actually say, write down what you want from these sessions, write down what you are struggling with, write down what it feels like to be in the world now. Because when you go back and work with them, they can see the change that has happened then. And I think it's quite an important process. And I think it also helps people value the people they get support from. You don't say, I offer quantum anything, even though quantum's not big, it's tiny. I always have a chuckle about that. So these are all the different parts. Now, there are other parts to it, but these are some of the core parts to change. So the first, as we talked about, you absolutely need safety and connection. Change is not going to happen without it. Now, some people say, yeah, I changed for being shamed. And yes, they might have experienced some change. But when change is happening, we actually soften. We come into more connection with ourselves. We come into more compassion with ourselves. So you will see people who say, oh, I've got all this change, but you will see elements of themselves that had to harden in order for something else to change. Whereas when we've got safety and connection, there isn't shaming there, then something is just softening more and more. You see more joy. You're around people that you actually feel better just for sitting next to them, because they are starting to give something out when change is really happening. And part of this, part of the things that stop change from happening is that there are parts that are yet to be processed from the past. So what we are doing is we are feeling and healing in the present moment that which couldn't be felt in the past. And when those past parts get to heal and be felt in the present moment, then we start to change how we are in the world. And as part of this process, when we're working with somebody else, we're helping develop our awareness. So one of the things, people will often say to me, it's one of the most asked questions, how can I do this myself without a therapist? How do I do this in between our sessions? The developing of awareness is mostly with somebody else helping us see something we can't see. So we see a pattern, we see a part that hasn't been listened to, we see a style where they're getting stuck in one style and they're not moving to another. We can't do that for ourselves because it is not in our awareness. It is unconscious. So we absolutely have to have somebody else do that with us. And the healing of our inner critic, while we're running a harsh dialogue that is constantly laying waste to who we are and what we do in the world and what we say, becomes impossible for anything to change. So when we can start speaking to ourselves with our care and compassion, then something starts to shift. And one of the things that changes that the most is actually hearing somebody speak to us with care and compassion. And I remember you saying, whoa, I don't know about you speaking to me like this. And because we are learning, we're basically stepping in as a parent that didn't do that and giving something. And eventually people learn to speak to themselves because they hear us in their head, and then then it becomes their own voice over time. And so, again, another thing you can't do for yourself. You have to have somebody else there to do it for you. And then, of course, the paradox of change is that so often you hear people go, let go, stop doing whatever. And actually change doesn't happen like that. Change happens when we understand where we are, where we love our patterns of protection, when we can see them, how they kept us safe, how they allowed us to survive the world that we were born into. And when we love and accept them, they actually then dissolve because they're no longer needed. Whereas when we push against them, we're trying to commit suicide in a part of our body, and our body will never allow that. It then makes that part stronger and stronger. So the more we struggle and push it away, the more our body goes, this served me in some kind of way, I'm not letting it go. But when we heal the part that actually needed that pattern, then we don't need it, and we celebrate that pattern in the process, then something softens and changes. The change isn't, it's not a struggle. It's an acceptance. It's a being with. Oh, okay, it's just whether the cough really
Mm,
hits me. That's the thing, is like it just comes sometimes and then
yeah,
it's just prohibitive. It just can't do anything once it starts.
yeah.
But I've done a little bit of steaming. So let's see how we go. So if I look a little moist, there's a reason.
And not at all.
Okay. Um, so I think we are recording now. Um,
Okay, yeah.
okay, so the other part are the shadow parts. So these are the parts often that we have inside ourselves, and they're the parts our parents actually did something to us. So it was deeply unenjoyable what they did to us. And then we find ourselves doing something similar. And we mostly struggle to turn towards those parts. So, say my mum hit me as a child, then when I hit my child, to actually take responsibility for that part is huge. And until we can actually turn towards those parts without feeling guilt or shame or simply not even being willing to even look at them, something stays stuck in us. So when we hold somebody, with deep compassion and care and love, and they know they are never going to be shamed or made wrong by us, they are more likely to turn towards those paths. So when we hold containers where shame is a way of trying to activate people or get people to change, there is no way they will talk about those shadow paths.
Hmm.
And you can see in certain containers that you're in, people just won't because they know they aren't safe enough to do it. And now then there's the protection processes that we talked about today. These are the patterns that we learn to keep ourselves safe. And again, that's loving those patterns, that's accepting those patterns, that's understanding them. And when you were saying, curiosity is such a fundamental part of this, it's the curiosity alongside recognizing what's happening so that you can see, the person's getting stuck in this point. Let's be curious here. There's somewhere that pattern showing up, whether it's a style of contact, whether it's an emotional protection pattern. You start to know, somewhere along how people take action in the world, they're getting stuck here. Let's be curious in this place. So a lot of these ways of kind of explaining how people are in the world allows you to identify the place where they're getting stuck, to be curious. Because, if we're just curious overall, we can find ourselves not kind of going into the place that is really the point where the person is finding it difficult for movement to come in. So all these parts that we've talked about in this training are ways to hold this bigger picture of where your client struggles and then where to go in. Where's the most useful place to go in? And the cycle of contact, again, is because change takes place by all of these places on the cycle of contact being tended to. And when some of them are being missed, then what happens is we lose out in that full sense of integration, that completion, that feeling of actual achievement, having done something. Even if we have a list, what does it mean after we've completed one task on the list? How does it feel to have completed it? That we actually have, I think sometimes that celebration that people say is that part of trying to get that part in somehow, recognizing that it's missing. Is like when they say lock it in, it's like what it is acknowledging what's happened and what it's felt in our body to have done what we've done. And then grieving is a part that is talked about, I think, the least, even in a lot of therapeutic circles for some reason. And grieving, I think, is one of the core pieces because people grieve what they didn't get to experience. So if a parent's been harsh, what would it have been like if a parent had been loving? What would their life have looked like? So they grieve a life lost. And it's, you know, a life that could have been different. They would have chosen different work in the world. They would have chosen different partners. They would have parented, if they have children, they would have parented differently. There can be a huge amount of grief, and a lot of parents will come up and say, you know, if I'd only known this, or if I'd only healed earlier, or I would have done something differently. But it's also what was done to them and what they got to miss out in the world. And I think it's only when it's a fair level of awareness starts to develop that people really start to experience the grief. And I think it can often get dismissed and not really given the space it needs. And then, of course, the integrating parts. That so often someone will say they want one thing and they do the other, and it's because they're conflicting parts in us. It's like someone stays in a relationship even though it's a terrible relationship, or stays in a job even though it's a terrible job, because another part says, if you leave, there might not be anything. This might be the best you get, or I'm getting something from this, and if I leave, I might get nothing. So I might not have another job, or it might be worse, or, you know, it meets some level of security, at least getting a paycheck, even though they hate the job. And we can listen to these different parts in a person and have them speak to one another, even have them, you know, put a piece of paper with a line down the middle and the two parts get to say. Then they have a sense, because it's often, and it's also often the most unspoken part. So one part will be very dominant. I want to leave. I hate the company. They're all awful. They treat me badly. And then the part that actually is staying doesn't actually get to be heard. So when we work actually a little bit more on that part and go, wondering what keeps you there, what is it like to stay? What does it mean to stay? Then that part that actually is going to resource the leaving gets to be heard.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you have any questions about this map.
No, it's really helpful actually to see it like that,
Mm.
because it brings in most of what we've been talking about,
Mm.
doesn't it? Um, no, I like it.
Perfect. And I think, yeah, we get a sense of then of how complicated change is, and why most people struggle.
Mm,
Why
yep.
most people say, I've been doing this for so long, I've been healing for so long. Why is it not shifting, kind of thing? And there's so many different components that, you know, feeling the feelings is one of those parts, but it is one. There are so many other aspects to it that enable something to shift and to change.
Yeah. Will you put that picture in that
Yes.
document in the thing as well? Yeah, perfect. Thank
So that'll be in the notes as well. So now, with a lot of coughing and some theory involved in this recording, um, I'm going to stop this recording now, because then we will move on to going and listening to Cynthia and the work that I did with her. And I notice as well, you know, you did them alongside one another,
you.
which is actually quite useful in a training,
Mhm.
because then I can see what's happening. But the reason I don't is because somebody sees themselves. But, you know, for in this instance, I realize, and I've learned that actually for training purposes, you need to see both at the same time. But I think I went to how I normally work, and it's to see the person, because they don't really want to look at themselves. Well, they just want to see a big picture of me
Okay, so
responding to them.
it does actually, that's how it looks like on your screen as well. You
Yeah,
just see them when they're talking.
yeah. So that, yeah, because you see more of the person when they're bigger. You know, we're already losing a little bit because it's 2D.
Mm. Mhm.
And when they're in a smaller block, it's harder to see a little bit of what's happening in their body and stuff. So that's why I always work with
Mm.
them seeing me
Mhm.
big. Okay, so I'm going to stop this, and then